I am always amazed at the generosity of people, whether it's to their parish or any other charitable organization. People are remarkably generous. And so in the first reading it says, share your bread with the hungry, shelter those who are homeless, and clothe those who are naked. And if you do those things, the first reading says, you will have your vindication, you will have your reward in heaven, and your wounds will be healed. And so we always then are called to be generous to those around us, giving our bread to the hungry, sheltering the oppressed, clothing the naked. But Pope Francis recently has said that we have to go a bit farther than that. We have to look at things, look at our society a little differently. And indeed, Pope Francis and the last 100 years of popes have challenged us to look at our society in a different way, having to respond ethically to new realities that are in our society. So way back when, in 1891, Pope Leo XIII wrote an encyclical letter called Rerum Novarum, which translated means of new things. So he was rather distressed seeing the world, and especially the first world. That is, kids as young as 6 and 7 and 8 years old were working 10 or 12-hour days in factories under awful conditions. And people who were working in factories that time, some of them were hurt or killed on the job and they received no compensation. Well, too bad for you. And the company went on. And so Pope Leo wrote about how important it is to talk about the gap between the rich and the poor. Remember at that time, there were the robber barons of Andrew Carnegie and Rockefeller and Vanderbilt living incredibly decadent lives, whereas their workers were not. And so Leo called for free associations, now they're called unions. And so over the years, other popes have commented also on the changing realities of our society. John Paul II also wrote a letter talking about how we have to have living wages for people, and sometimes that there's a conflict between labor and between capital. But always we have to respond with love to all of the people of our society, no matter what job they may hold. And so the idea today is, when you give bread to the hungry and shelter the homeless, those people are going to be hungry tomorrow. They may not have a home tomorrow. And what we have to look at is how we form a more just society to get to the bottom of the poverty question. And so we realize even in our own times, we can see it very clearly, how there's a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. And even though we are a very prosperous nation, there are still millions of people who go hungry every single day. So Pope Francis recently wrote about the threats that are facing our society, facing the entire world. First of all, there is consumerism. That is buying constantly. And sometimes we buy things in order to feel good. And so I saw a statistic the other day saying that Americans spend 103% of their income every year, which means that they're putting themselves in an incredible amount of debt. And even though buying things may momentarily console us, we can never fill God's place with the stuff of our lives, with cars or TVs or whatever. And so Pope Francis writes about how we have to avoid the feverish pursuit of frivolous pleasures, and all of us can fall prey to it. Also, he said a threat to us is our economy of exclusion, which is a life issue among many other life issues. Many homeless people die of exposure each and every day, and that doesn't get on the news. But if the stock market drops 5 points, people go insane, and that's on the news. And so he says also that food is dumped out every day while many, many people starve. He criticizes trickle-down economics as a failed idea, and then he says that the free market is actually a naive notion. So some people may say, well, he's a pope, he doesn't get this stuff. He's not Alan Greenspan, why is he talking about this? Well, maybe if ethics and morality is introduced into business, we wouldn't have the Enron situation and the Aon and all of these other companies that basically rob people's pensions. And so that ethical voice is a necessary one. and one that we have to take up as well. And Pope Francis talks about a third threat, which is the idolatry of money. That is, our money can dominate us and run our lives, and that we need a financial system that serves everyone and not just a select few. So what is the antidote? Pope Francis says we have to say yes to new relationships that are brought upon by Christ. That is, we are our brother's keeper, even if that person is from a different socioeconomic strata than we are, even if this person is on the other side of the world in a different hemisphere. Still, we have to realize that all of us are brothers and sisters in the Lord. And then also, too, he says we have to say yes to a missionary spirituality that embraces the world and treats everyone like brothers and sisters. That is, we have to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots, because all of us are united together in this world. So the first reading says that we have to give bread to the poor, certainly, absolutely. Have to give homes to those who need shelter, absolutely, and clothe the naked. But we can't just stop there. We have to ask ethical questions about our economy and be an ethical voice about the function of that economy. Our faith really demands it. Now, people always get a little nervous when you start talking about that, saying, oh, now you're delving into politics. Well, not really. What we're doing is to delve into how people spend their money, and people are very protective of that. But even despite that nervousness that we may feel, still the Lord calls us to use our resources in an ethical way and always pay attention and realize that there are poor people in our society, and we, as Catholic Christian people, are called to reach out to them in love and in care. So we realize that our faith is in Jesus and not an economic system. And Jesus calls us to form a just society, respecting all people. And we can play a part in that transformation, reminding our society of the dignity of all people. And so we pray this morning that we may always be focused on the correct thing, on the right thing, and that is focusing on the faith that we have and how that unites us with all of the people of the world, and how we are called to use our resources, not to serve only ourselves, but to serve all people, so that all of us can live in dignity.